An excerpt from chapter 1 of Gouldtown reads, Gouldtown is comprised in two sections following the two family names of Gould and Pierce, which were always known by their separate names, Gouldtown and Piercetown, but both known comprehensively as Gouldtown. It is remarkable that it has perpetuated its family name in its locality for nearly 200 years. Also, because it is a community of mulattoes who, contrary to the pet theory of some astute ethnological scientists, have perpetuated themselves generation after generation for almost 2 centuries. Remarkable, too, for the known longevity of its people, who do not begin to grow old, as is often said, until they come to 80 years, and a number of whom have reached the century mark, one of whom, Ebenezer Pierce Bishop, is still living at this writing, who is 106 years old, and one of whom, Mrs. Lydia Gould Shepherd, was buried in the year 1911 at the age of 102 in the Gouldtown Cemetery, and a number of others who are still living at ages between 70 and 95 years. Several of the earlier Goulds and Pierces, as well as Murrays, intermarried with whites, and members of their immediate offspring went away and lost their identity. They had their descendants becoming white, while from those who still maintain their identity as people of color, there have come many who have reached distinction, and in whom their native county shows merited pride, as, for instance, a Methodist bishop, a chaplain in the United States Regular Army, a physician, a lawyer, a distinguished dentist, teachers, writers, journalists, and in the industrial arts, carpenters, masons, blacksmiths, wheelwrights, painters, carriage builders, woolen spinners and weavers, brickmakers, machinists, engineers, electricians, printers, factorymen, sailors, ministers of the gospel, and farmers. In fact, none of its sister villages has produced, taking equally of environment, more or better or more creditable individualities than has this settlement. This settlement, comprising all the families and both churches, is important for many reasons other than those before enumerated. That it does not abound in wealth and culture is due in great part to the fixed habits of the people, and to the fact that they have been all these years domiciled upon poor, timber-exhausted lands. The same labor, economy, and thrift which they practiced here, employed in homes upon a more productive soil, would long ago have placed many of the industrious, sober, and self-denying families of Gouldtown in circumstances of substantial comfort, if not of affluence. They are not as slothful and backward farmers as one might assume from the neglected appearance of too many of their homes and their teams. But their poor land, coupled with the increased cost of living, compels them to give their attention to pressing necessities, to the neglect of the things which would add to appearances. They are interested in agriculture, close observers, and hard workers. And considering the conditions, obtain from their fields fair crops. They have estates ranging from 1,000 to 15,000 or $20,000. As far back as 1860, a large audience assembled to listen to a well-prepared paper on agriculture delivered in the Gouldtown schoolhouse by a young man of the neighborhood who had not then reached his majority. In that paper, he cited methods of cultivation practiced in China, dealt with the pulverization of the surface, descanted upon the value of compost, and spoke of utilizing mud and forest leaves as fertilizing agencies. A half-century ago, there was a moral and mental improvement society in Gouldtown, and it was from this society's library that the youth borrowed and read Dick's works, and by those books was introduced into the primary mysteries of natural philosophy. Many simple experiments were made by the boys of the community after the models given by that interesting writer. This library contained many volumes of standard works. Principal institutions outside of the family were and are still the school and the church. Up to 1860, these both occupied the same building, the circuit preacher getting around once every 3 or 4 weeks. In the interval, the pulpit was supplied by local preachers, among whom was Uncle Furman Gould, the first preacher of any kind known among the Goulds. The preaching, both of the circuit preacher and of the local preacher, occupied itself extensively with the eternal themes of fleeing the wrath to come and securing a home in heaven. The hardships of poverty and homes on earth had no place in their sermons. They had no lessons to give, such as might tend to make the souls of their hearers prosper. The preachers as such had nothing to contribute to aid the people in making their homes more attractive and sanitary, or their farms more productive. The same, with even more emphasis, could be said of the school. The Gouldtown School was a typical district school with its own board of trustees. These trustees, 3 in number, with very little knowledge of school books or methods, hired the schoolmaster, who, without examination or license, started in on the appointed day to keep school. These schoolmasters never had one word to say as to the purpose of education, and never related it, except in ciphering, to anything in the actual lives of the scholars. They were taught to spell, to read, to write. But were taught nothing on life, conduct, and character. Nothing that might aid or inspire youth to advance materially or even intellectually. The idea of general improvement of the student did not seem to be present. It is painful to say, but nevertheless true, that neither the church nor the school, as they existed in Gouldtown under the old methods, contributed anything directly to the material or moral growth of the community. That the church contributed powerfully, indirectly, by the stress it put on conscious spiritual life must be admitted. and that the school did the same by its almost mechanical methods of teaching children to read and write. But both failed to enter into or improve or brighten the everyday life of the people as they might have done. Nothing that either taught had the slightest bearing upon their most burning question: how to wring a living out of a poor land. Their actual situation, crying as it was, called forth no sympathetic response from either church or school. The teachers were almost always white men, and, it must be said, did their best. From this chapter 1 excerpt, we get that the Steward brothers wrote Gouldtown to emphasize that teaching on life, conduct, and character is core at home, not at church or school, and to document thrift among community members using property and other records.